Sugar, it's just a white powder seems harmless, right? Not so fast. In 2018, a St. Louis mother named Maria filed a class action lawsuit against a major cereal brand. Her claim, that the heart healthy label on the box was misleading because the product contained 14 grams of added sugar per serving. The case dragged on for 22 months. By the time it settled, Maria wasn't just out $1.2 million in legal fees. She was out something far more personal, her peace of mind. Because the real question is whether sugar is in your food. It's what it's doing to your body and why the fear around it has spiraled into a full-blown health panic. A close-up of a cereal box label flashes on screen. 14G added sugars in bold red text. So let's start here. The myth that all added sugar is the enemy. That idea didn't come from nowhere. It came from decades of oversimplified headlines, fear-based marketing, and let's be honest, some seriously shaky science. Enter Dr. Jessica Nurek, a nutrition epidemiologist whose work isn't about fear. It's about facts. And she's here to tell us something most people don't want to hear. The sugar panic might be doing more harm than the sugar itself. On screen, Dr. Jessica Nurek appears in bold white font over a neutral background. Nurek doesn't sell meal plans. She doesn't peddle detox teas. She's a scientist who looks at data, not trends. And when she dug into the research on added sugars, she found something unsettling. The link between sugar and disease isn't as clear-cut as we've been led to believe. Take cardiovascular disease. A 2017 review in the Journal of the American Heart Association found that excess added sugars, meaning way beyond what most people actually consume, are associated with higher risk. But here's the catch. That risk only kicks in at levels most of us never reach. Source. So why does the fear persist? The camera zooms in on a nutrition label, zooming in on the added sugars line. It starts with a simple label change. In 2016, the FDA mandated that added sugars must appear on every nutrition facts panel. At first glance, that seems like progress, but in practice, turned a useful tool into a weapon, because now every gram counts. Every added teaspoon becomes a guilt trigger, and that guilt has real consequences. The tone shifts softer, more reflective. Consider this. In 2020, the U.S. Dietary Guidelines recommended limiting added sugars to less than 10% of daily calories. Source, sounds reasonable. But when the next headline screams, "Sugar is killing you," what happens? Parents start swapping whole milk for almond milk. Kids eat cereal with zero added sugar but twice the artificial junk. And somewhere in the middle, a perfectly healthy food gets demonized not because of what it does, but because of what it doesn't. Split screen. One side shows a bowl of oatmeal with fruit. The other, a bowl of sugary cereal labeled 0G added sugar. That's not progress. That's a new kind of deficiency. Now let's be clear. We're not talking about eating sugar without awareness. We're talking about a system that turns a single nutrient into a moral failing. One that makes people afraid of fruit because it has natural sugars, afraid of yogurt because it has lactose, afraid of everything. And that fear, it's being monetized. Text appears. $4.2 billion global market size of sugar-free foods in 2023. Look at the sugar-free aisle. It's a $4.2 billion industry built on the idea that sugar is poison. Source, but here's the irony. Many of these healthy alternatives replace sugar with artificial sweeteners, chemicals that, according to a 2019 JAMA analysis, have no robust evidence for long-term health benefits. Source. So we trade one set of unknowns for another, and through it all, the real villains get ignored. The camera zooms out from the sugar-free aisle to show a fast food restaurant in the background. Because let's face it, added sugar isn't lurking in your apple, it's in your ketchup, your salad dressing, your protein bar. It's in the food industry's playbook not because it's toxic, but because it's cheap, tasty, and addictive. The FDA even admits that nutrition labels, must reflect the actual nutrient content of a product. Source, but labels don't tell the full story. They don't tell you that the sugar in your yogurt might be less harmful than the trans fats in your low-fat muffin. And that's the real myth. The screen fades to black. A single question appears in white text. What if the war on sugar is just a distraction from the war on real nutrition? Dr. Jessica Nurick is here to tell us why that war is built on bad science and what we should really be fighting for. Text appears at bottom. Full interview with Dr. Nurick coming up. But first, let's talk about fat, because here's a fact the sugar panic buried: not all fats are bad. In fact, some are essential. And that misconception, it's been costing us for decades. Source. So if the sugar myth is a house of cards, the fat myth, it's the foundation holding it up, and it's time to tear it down. Pseudonym, advice, disclaimer, place at very end of section. Dr. Jessica Nurick is a nutrition epidemiologist, not a medical doctor. Always consult a licensed healthcare provider before making changes to your diet or lifestyle. This content is for educational purposes only. The camera tightens on a pile of sugar cubes stacked like Jenga blocks, each one labeled with a familiar brand. The blocks start to topple. Narration. You see this image everywhere. Sugar cubes tumbling into a pile, warning labels flashing red, doctors calling it toxic. But what if the real story is more complicated? Today, we're going through the claims. We'll look at the science, the politics, and the psychology behind the sugar debate with Dr. Jessica Nurick. Added sugar, sugars and syrups added to foods during processing. Narration. Let's start with the basics. Added sugar isn't the sugar in an apple. It's the sugar added to applesauce. It's the syrup in your coffee, the honey drizzled on your yogurt. According to the FDA, these are chemically identical to table sugar, but they're not naturally part of the food. That's why regulators require them to be listed separately on nutrition labels. Split screen. One side shows whole fruit, the other shows fruit-flavored yogurt with a long ingredient list. The yogurt's label highlights sugar and fruit juice concentrate. Narration. Natural sugars come packaged with fiber, vitamins, water. Added sugars come with calories and often not much else. A 2020 government report found that Americans get nearly half of their added sugars from drinks and snacks that provide little nutritional value. Source: 2020-2025 Dietary Guidelines for Americans. Narration. But here's the first misconception: the idea that sugar alone turns your liver into fat storage. Dr. Nurick pulls up a 2018 meta-analysis from the National Institutes of Health. It reviewed 60 studies and found that excess added sugars, especially in liquid form, are linked to higher triglycerides, insulin resistance, and increased risk of cardiovascular disease. Close-up of the NIH paper's forest plot showing upward-pointing risk diamonds. Narration. The data isn't about a single cookie. It's about chronic, high-dose intake sodas, energy drinks, processed pastries consumed day after day. Source: excess added sugars are associated with increased risk of cardiovascular disease, NIH, 2018. Dr. Nurick flips through a slide titled, Calories in Not Equal to Calories Out. She taps a graph showing total daily energy intake, rising alongside added sugar consumption. Narration. Now critics say, obesity is just calories in, calories out. Dr. Nurick pushes back. She points to studies showing that liquid sugars like in soda fail to trigger satiety the way solid food does. The result? You drink 250 calories and still feel hungry. But calories aren't the only variable. Sleep, stress, genetics, and food environment all shape weight variables often left out of viral sound bites. Sugar alone doesn't cause obesity, but it's a major accelerant. Narration. Still, the myth persists. Sugar is the root of all metabolic evil. Dr. Nurek challenges that claim directly. She cites CDC data showing that obesity rates rose even as added sugar intake plateaued in the 2010s. At the same time, ultra-processed foods, including those with low sugar, saw sharp increases in consumption. Side-by-side line graphs, one showing flat sugar intake, the other showing rising obesity and ultra-processed food sales. Narration. So if sugar isn't the sole villain, what's the real driver? Dr. Nurek flips the frame. The rise of hyperpalatable, ultra-processed foods, often loaded with sugar, salt, and fat, designed to hijack reward circuits in the brain. Source: CDC Nutrition and Obesity Misconceptions, 2023. Dr. Nurek holds up a bag of chips and a soda can. She sets them apart. Narration. Both are ultra-processed. Both are engineered to be overconsumed. But one gets 90% of the blame. Why? Dr. Nurek's voice dry. Because one tastes like dessert. The other tastes like dinner. Narration. She's not saying sugar is harmless. It's not. But she's asking us to look at the full picture, the food matrix, the eating environment, and the marketing budgets behind these products. Split screen. One side shows a vending machine in a hospital lobby, the other shows a farm stand with fresh produce. Narration. Aggressive questioning cuts through the noise. Dr. Nurek presses advocates who claim sugar is uniquely toxic. Where's the dose-response curve? What about the confounding role of overall diet quality? Are you sure you're not blaming a single nutrient for a systemic failure? The tone shifts from analytical to skeptical. Narration. She's not attacking the messenger. She's interrogating the message. Because when advice becomes ideology, nuance disappears. And when nuance disappears, public health suffers. A close-up of a sugar cube dissolving in water, no label, no warning, just chemistry. Narration. So is added sugar dangerous? Yes. Is it the only cause of obesity? Does it deserve every headline? Not if we want the truth. Evidence requires context. Solutions require systems. Narration. Now let's turn to the next layer. How the sugar industry shaped dietary guidelines for decades. We'll expose the hidden bias and why it still matters today. Close-up on Dr. Nurek. She leans forward holding a printed study. For decades, we've been told sugar is the silent killer lurking in our coffee, snacks, and even our bread. But what if the real villain isn't sugar itself, but the way we've been looking at it? The myth: added sugar is always harmful. Split screen. Left side shows a fear-mongering headline, Sugar KILLS. Right side flashes the CDC myth-busting page. Dr. Nurek's research flips the script. She found that the impact of added sugar isn't universal, it's context-dependent. That's right. The same amount of sugar can affect two people differently, depending on what else they're eating, how active they are, and even their genetics. Dr. Nurek points to a graph on screen showing sugar's effect across different diet qualities. Source: in a 2018 peer-reviewed study in the Journal of the American Heart Association, researchers isolated sugar's effects by controlling for overall diet quality. They discovered that when added sugars were consumed within a high-quality diet rich in vegetables, lean proteins, and whole grains, their negative effects diminished significantly. Dramatic pause. Music drops slightly. Let me say that again. The harm of added sugar isn't inevitable. It's modifiable. Side-by-side visual. Left shows a donut labeled myth. Right shows a balanced meal labeled evidence. Compare this to the outdated advice that saturated fat is the enemy. Source: the 2020-2025 Dietary Guidelines for Americans state that saturated fat should be limited to less than 10% of calories, but they also acknowledge that the type of fat matters more than the amount. The same logic applies to sugar. Dr. Nurek holds up a nutrition label. Here's the kicker. The FDA now requires labels to reflect actual nutrient content. Source: FDA's 2016 guidance. That means when you see added sugars on a label, you're not just looking at empty calories, you're seeing a piece of the puzzle, not the whole picture. The breakthrough: added sugar's impact depends on diet quality, not quantity alone. Quick montage. A person runs on a treadmill, then eats a salad, then pours sugar into coffee. Each clip transitions smoothly. So what does this mean for you? It means you can stop fearing sugar and start understanding it. If you're eating a diet packed with nutrients, the occasional treat won't derail your health. But if your diet is already high in processed foods, then yes, cutting back on added sugars could make a difference. Dr. Nurek looks directly into the camera. This isn't just about sugar. It's about how we've been trained to see nutrients in black and white. Source: the CDC's myth-busting page even calls out the oversimplification of fats, another example of how blanket statements in nutrition do more harm than good. Music swells slightly, then cuts to silence. So next time you hear a nutrition claim that sounds too absolute, whether it's about sugar, fat, or supplements, ask, where's the evidence? Source: a 2019 JAMA study found that many over-the-counter supplements lack robust evidence for health benefits. The pattern is the same. Screen fades to black with text. Question the myths. Demand the data. Your health isn't dictated by a single nutrient. It's shaped by the full picture of what you eat, how you live, and what you believe. And now you've got the tools to see that picture clearly. So we've spent this whole episode separating sugar fact from sugar fiction, and here's the bottom line. Sugar isn't the sole enemy. A diet out of balance is. Too much added sugar can raise the risk of cardiovascular disease, according to peer-reviewed research. But cutting it without replacing it, that's just as risky. The 2020-2025 dietary guidelines remind us that saturated fat still needs a cap less than 10% of calories. And the FDA makes sure labels tell the truth, not hype. So what do you do next? Start with your cart. Flip every package. Scan the label. Ask, where's the real nutrition? Then go deeper. Check peer-reviewed sources, not influencers. The CDC puts it plain, not all fats are bad, unsaturated fats help. And when you see an over-the-counter supplement promising miracles, remember, JAMA reports most lack solid evidence. Knowledge is power, but action moves mountains. Read labels. Question claims. Share what you learn. Challenge the noise in your feed. And join the conversation in our community forum. Your voice shapes what we cover next. Because the real myth isn't about sugar, it's about letting one nutrient steal the spotlight. Next time, we're tackling another health headline with the same no BS lens. Until then, stay curious, stay skeptical, and keep asking why.